Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Church of Palo Alto, where we come to transform ourselves and each other and the world. It's good to be together this morning. You are welcome to keep your video on throughout the service. We'll mostly keep our audio off, but let's all unmute right now for a few moments to give our greetings to one another, wish each other hello and good morning. Good morning. Good morning. So good to hear people's voices. Good morning, good morning. Hello. Great. Good. You can see the order of service by following the link that you'll see in your chat. That has lots of useful information, both about the service and about things that are coming up later today and this week. I just want to particularly call your attention to Discovering UUCPA, which takes place today, 1 to 2, and has a bit of a different format than we've followed for the last few years. So there will be different themes of different discovering sessions. Everybody is welcome. It's not for newcomers only, but anybody who wants to learn what we're talking about there. And today it will be a rapid introduction to Unitarian Universalist history, as well as always, a chance to get to know each other and have a bit of a connection with the congregation that's especially useful if you're fairly new here. And now, let us begin our service. Wonderful to have Sarah's music. If you have a chalice or candle there with me, please light it along with me. We light our chalice here today with the words of activist Ella Baker. Give light, and people will find the way. With our centering words each week, we draw on the many sources of our living tradition. Today's words are from Marcia McPhee. Joy does not wait for the struggle to be over. As we follow the sound of the bell into silence, let us allow ourselves to arrive here fully. Please join in as Bruce leads us in singing Return Again.
soul. Return again, return again, return to the home of your soul.
Something that reminds us that we are still a community of care and support and celebration, even when we seldom meet together in one physical space, is our sharing at Caring and Sharing Time. If you have a joy or a sorrow in your life that you would like others here to know, we will tenderly hold them. And you can share them by posting in the Zoom chat or by sending them, even now, to joyconcern@uucpa.org. I've got my email open to receive them right now. Let us now take a few moments of silent prayer or meditation to hold all that we've heard with compassion and care, sharing and magnifying one another's joys, lightening one another's sorrows through this network of care. Blessed be. Please join in as Bruce leads us in singing Rank by Rank.
Rank by rank again we meet, from the four winds gathered hither. Loud the hallowed walls entreat, whence we come and how and whither. From their stillness breaking clear, echoes wake to warn or cheer. Higher truth from saint and seer, call to us assembled here. Ours the year's memorial store, honored days and names we reckon, days of comrades gone before, lives that speak and deeds that beckon. From the dreaming of the night to the labors of the day, shines their everlasting light, guiding us upon our way. Though the path be hard and long, still we strive in expectation. Join we now their ageless song, one with them in aspiration, one in name, in honor, one. Guard we well the crown they won, what they dreamed be ours to do. Hope their hopes and seal them true.
Our reading today is from The Life of Reason, The Phases of Human Progress by Jorge Agustin Nicolás Ruiz de Santayana y Borràs. Progress, far from consisting in change, depends on retentiveness. When change is absolute, there remains no being to improve, and no direction is set for possible improvement. And when experience is not retained, as among savages, infancy is perpetual. Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. There's a symbol that comes down from the Akan people of what is now Ghana in West Africa called Sankofa. You can see one of the many renditions of this image in your order of service. A bird with feet facing forward and turning all the way backwards, as if looking behind it. And in fact, Sankofa means to look behind to the past in order to move into the future. Or it can mean simply, go back and fetch it. In this teaching, so important to the Akan people, we have a lot of wisdom that we can learn over and over as a country, as individuals, as any community with a past. And we saw the need for Sankofa acutely this week when the first anniversary of the January 6th assault on the U.S. Capitol came. Some looked back solemnly, replaying, reviewing, looking at pictures, telling stories of that day, while others spoke insistently of the need to move on, the need to go forward, and how even marking the day was a distraction from what really matters. Now, this is obviously extremely politically charged. And clearly, for those who wanted Trump to stay in office, and for many Republicans who didn't particularly, but just are Republicans, it's a painful day to look back on. It's a lot harder to look at crimes and misdemeanors when the criminals are aligned with your cause, no matter how much you and they differ, and no matter how much you make that clear. It's a lot easier when you're already not in the same camp. But this is what an honest look at the past does. It makes evident any tensions between what we have done and been, or what others have done in our names, and what we want to do and be moving forward. That is painful, but it's also the medicine we need. After all, those who looked back are also the ones who want to hold the rioters responsible and call to account those who gave them funding and tactics. Without looking back, they won't uncover that information. And surely, turning backwards with feet planted firmly forwards will help keep such attempts from succeeding in the future. On a personal level, we all have things in our past of which we say, never again. We gain strength from remembering, not trying to dwell in the past, but just recalling, paying attention enough, even especially to the things that are most painful, most shameful, or challenging to remember. We get information there and wisdom that we need for going forward in the way we want to, not repeating the past unaware. And the past may also have the very tools that we need to endure whatever other challenges come our way. The answer to how did we survive the most difficult experiences is often right there in the past. And we won't see it if we're afraid to look at those bad experiences at all. In fact, it can be very liberating. One description of the Akan culture in the Americas, since many of them in the tens of millions now are descended from people who were enslaved, first as prisoners of war in a time of war in West Africa in the Akan territory, and then by European slavers who came to their shores. So, one description of their culture here in the Americas says a high number of military captives were sold into slavery, with the result that these, quote, soldiers and other Akan captives were known for various slave revolts and plantation resistance tactics. It's poetic to consider that their resolution and ability to break out of enslavement were powered partly by Sankofa. They were going back to retrieve something from their past, their freedom and self-determination, their knowledge of how to fight in difficult times. They could look back and bring that from times long ago, from earlier in their lives, from earlier in their culture, and from a place far across the ocean when they were in even more dire straits in the Caribbean or on these shores. We probably all know that quote from Santayana, at least that last line, "Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it." It's interesting that in Santayana's name, there is itself this kind of erasing of a truth of the past. He was a 20th century philosopher. His name is usually anglicized. Even in his own printing of his books, it appeared as George Santayana. And yet, those who do not remember that a Spaniard, a Spanish man named Jorge Agustín Nicolás Ruiz de Santayana y Borrás, was a distinguished philosopher, are condemned to dismiss the Spanish-speaking world, or at least to forget some of the wisdom that it has brought to the wider world community. And then Santayana himself spoke in that very passage of savages who do not retain experience. And yet it's probably a good guess that the people of his time and place, if not Santayana himself, would have called the Akan people savages, these people who had such wisdom and continue to have such wisdom about learning from experience. A piece of history most of us didn't learn, and so we don't see it when we look back, unless we look hard, is the number of times that an angry, outvoted minority has subverted or outright overthrown an election right here in the United States. We don't learn, at least I did not learn when I was in school or until very recently, the huge variety of ways that they have employed in order to overturn and thwart democracy. 2021 did not come out of nowhere. There's a through line in U.S. history of people suppressing the vote, especially of people of color, often and violently, and also overthrowing via violence the outcome of an election that did not go the way the interests of white supremacy would have wished. I'm going to share with you just a few of those items. In 1868, in Georgia, there were post-war changes to the Georgia state constitution. And 33 African-American men, all Republicans, of course, that was the party that was founded specifically to oppose slavery and was the party of the Union side in the Civil War just passed. 33 African-American men, Republicans, were elected to the Georgia State Assembly. They were dubbed the original 33 because they were some of the first African-American state legislators anywhere in the country. The white, Democratic, in other words, Confederate, pro-war, pro-secession majority in the legislature conspired to remove all black and mixed race assembly members and expelled the original 33. They were voted in, fair and square, but out they went. One of them organized a political rally, and hundreds of his black and white supporters marched into Camilla, Georgia. There, the sheriff deputized local white supremacists, and they fired on the marchers as they arrived at the town square, killing 15, wounding dozens. And they proceeded through the countryside beating and warning blacks that they would be killed if they voted in the next election. This intimidation significantly reduced the Republican vote, and none of the original 33 returned to the state assembly. 30 years later, in 1898, Wilmington, North Carolina was the largest city in the state, predominantly African American, and therefore, not surprisingly, predominantly Republican in those post-Civil War decades. White supremacists were pleased with how the election had gone in the state legislature, which had gone Democratic, that is, anti the Reconstruction government, anti the government supported by the Republicans. But Wilmington had stayed in that anti-slavery, pro-union party. On November 10th, a former Confederate officer named Alfred Waddell, a white supremacist, led a group of 500 people in burning a black-owned newspaper's building and rampaging through the town, killing 14 African Americans and terrifying hundreds of others into fleeing. They got the nod of silence from complete inaction from the federal and state governments. And taking this as permission, the mob forced the Republican city officials to resign and declared Waddell the mayor. Moving forward another 20 years. In 1920, Ocoee, Florida, had been politically dominated by conservative Democrats since the end of Reconstruction. The Ku Klux Klan and others prided themselves on keeping blacks, who again, mostly Republicans, from the polls. In 1920, with the presidential election coming up, a number of black organizations across Florida began conducting voter registration campaigns, and one recently registered black voter attempted to vote in the national election on November 2nd in his hometown of Ocoee. He was driven away and returned. He was driven away again. He hadn't paid his poll tax, they claimed. And the second time they drove him away, he was hunted down by a white mob. They never found him, but they lynched the friend with whom he was thought to have sheltered, Julius Perry. They injured Perry's wife and children and hung his dead body from a telephone post by the highway to intimidate other potential black voters. In case the message was not perfectly clear, they attached a note, "This is what we do to," epithet I will not say, "who try to vote." And then, as in Camilla, the mob burned down homes and businesses throughout the black community, demanded black residents leave. Most of them did, terrified for their lives, and over 50 black and 2 white residents died. The NAACP and other civil rights organizations called on the House Election Committee of the U.S. Congress to investigate the massacre and black voter suppression in Florida, but it declined to do so. No black person cast a vote in the entire county for the next 18 years. Many more incidents come closer to our own memories. In the 60s, of course, and the violent response to voter registration then. Now, knowing this, knowing that there is a long history of threats against elected officials who go against white supremacy, a blanket threat carried out by terrorism, lynching and beating against any person of color who dares to vote. Knowing that that continued up until the 60s, resulting in the Voting Rights Act. And that as soon as the Voting Rights Act was largely weakened by the Supreme Court just a few years ago. Many of the states that were constrained under it broke out the exact same techniques they'd been using for voter suppression before. Knowing all this could help us watch out for future attacks, could help us to know in an election, if one candidate is seen as the ally of white supremacists and the other is seen as their enemy, watch out. There are people who will insist on putting their white supremacist-backed official in place, whether that official wins or not. If we looked back at our history more, maybe we could not only prevent January 6th from happening again, maybe it wouldn't have happened in the first place. What kind of preparations might we have made if part of the national narrative were, when elections have gone against the myth of white racial superiority, look at some of the things that have happened. A look at both the times that violence resulted and the times it didn't, so that we could see what to do, what helps, what preserves our democracy when it's under threat. Because once again, here in 2020, we knew we had a candidate who, regardless of his own views, was seen very much by white supremacists as their man, and the one that they were determined to see in office no matter what. Looking back, as I said, is also about looking at what we do want to repeat. My researches about this history, for example, took me to the lovely little town that I'm sure I never would have discovered otherwise, of Wrenville, Ohio, southern Ohio in Appalachia. It was a coal town when it was founded in 1879 as an explicitly integrated community. This was a time when sundown towns were common in that area. Towns where people of color, specifically African Americans, knew they could work, but they needed to be out of town by sundown or they were not safe. Not Wrenville. Wrenville's founder, who was involved in the coal industry, wanted to hire people of all nationalities and races, for which he got quite a lot of pushback from other coal miners and other coal mine owners. He wanted to create a community where people got along across color lines. And they did. In more recent years, the people who've come out of Wrenville, people who look back fondly, black and white, look back at this town and they said, we need to recognize this. We need a sign, one of those historical markers that talks about what was done here. We need a historical society that will trace the people who've grown up in this community and what they went on to do, having learned that people of different races can get along even when people in their own workplace are saying they can't. Even when towns in the area are saying, nope, you've got to be black or white. These people cannot live together. The whites always have to be on top. They created a historical society to say, how is Wrenville producing leaders of different races? How is it that people remember living together with equality and dignity? Sankofa, looking back to get what we can for the future from the past. Now, the Sankofa bird is not only looking back, she is retrieving an egg that she carries on her back. What she's bringing forward is not only the wisdom of the past, but the very seed of the future. It's not easy, this process of looking back. Sometimes we want to plant our feet forward and take Satchel Paige's advice, don't look back, something might be gaining on you. But the bird of Sankofa says, you know what's behind you? The egg that you will need. That is the future right there. That's the next generation. And when you look backwards, that's what you'll find. Our past is also sprinkled with these seeds, these eggs, messages to the future, with the DNA of our future lives coiled up inside, with the wisdom to draw upon the past and use what we learn there to keep moving forward. What can't we do? Where can't we go? Let us live in the spirit of Sankofa, to open our future up to anywhere we dream of going. Thank you. Now that we're online, I always give my donation through the website, and I love the little bubbles like champagne that come up when your donation has been accepted. It's like this little treat. Now, please join in as Bruce leads us in singing Come and Go With Me. Again, in the words of the great Ella Baker, give light and people will find a way to that land. So take this light with you, the light of our heritage, the light of this community. And wherever you go this week, whatever challenges you are facing, know that it goes with you. and we will light it again together when we gather again next week. Just beautiful. Please stay after the benediction for our virtual coffee time. You'll be invited to small group conversations in our breakout rooms, or you can stay here in the main room with me to discuss the topic of the service. Now please unmute yourself and turn on your video if you're comfortable with both of those things. And you can touch hands virtually like this up against the sides of your box, or put a hand on your heart and another out to others while we say our benediction together. Go out into the world in peace. Be of good courage. Hold fast to what is good. Return no one evil for evil. Strengthen the faint-hearted. Support the weak. Help the suffering. Rejoice in beauty. Speak love with word and deed. Honor all beings. Amen.
Lovely day.